Well, hello, hello, hello. Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining today. Today we are going to be discussing the rise of the direct applicant and how to win over this segment in clearing this year. And actually the idea for this webinar came from when we were doing the National Clearing Survey webinars or towards the end of last year, beginning of this year. And we went through the different segments and we asked a poll for all the participants which of these segments is the most difficult to engage with, the most difficult to target. And the direct applicant or the direct clearing applicant was the one that always came back the most difficult. So we thought, okay, let's do a mini series of webinars where we do a deep dive into the data, keep it short and snappy, give you more insight, give you some clear tips and sort of help going into clearing for I suppose your marketing strategies and advertising campaigns that are being planned and potentially going live pretty soon. Also, there should be a series of other webinars that come out of this as well. So keep your eyes peeled for more from them. As always, any questions that you've got along the way, please drop them into the chat box or the Q&A box. I'll either answer them as we go if I'm feeling brave, or I'll come to them all at the end. But yeah, please, if you've got any questions or any comments, please put them in there. It's always great to see. So that's me. I'm Nick Wilmer. I'm Head of Education at Natives. I've been working in the education marketing sector for 13 years now. I'm a little bit obsessed with data and segmentation and marketing strategy. So this webinar is right up my street. I imagine that quite a few of you who are on the webinar today will probably be aware of the NCS, the National Clearing Survey. You might have participated in it and have your own bespoke report from the last survey, but for those who might be newer to it, the NCS, we started back in 2016. It's the only one of its kind in the sector, but essentially it's a very comprehensive annual deep dive into clearing students, the demographics, the behaviours, the motivations, barriers, and everything else that comes with clearing. We have surveyed just over 3,500 clearing students in total, and that means we've analysed 500,000 plus data points that we've analysed. And we have, from the last one, 38 partners that helped us make this happen. So that's 1 in 3 of the Russell groups, 1 in 5 of the post-92 institutions, as well as other types of institutions as well. But what that does, it gives us a really great cross-section of the student audience and a representative sample across the groups so that we can build analysis like we're going to go through today. So of the 4 segments that we usually talk about when we talk about the NCS findings, what we're going to focus on today is the direct applicant. So that segment is those that haven't made an application through UCAS prior to clearing, and then they enter the fray when clearing opens in sort of June time. So yeah, traditionally one that's been quite difficult to see, quite difficult to understand because they've not made that application, so you don't know where they're coming from. So hopefully today we can delve into that and really understand them and then work out marketing strategies to target the different audiences within that segment. When we look at the numbers since we've been doing this, so from 2016 to 2020, we have seen this huge rise in the direct student group or the direct student segment. It's now up to 35% of the overall group. So it's getting close to the number of direct to clearing students versus the traditional audience, based on the NCS findings. If I was going to make a prediction for next year, I think it might overtake it next year as well. So a really important segments to understand, get to grips with, and build into marketing strategies for clearing this year. Now, previously, we've taken averages across the segment. So we know they're generally older, higher numbers go to post-92 institutions. They tend to prefer subjects allied to medicine, they're more popular. And there's lots of barriers there around costs. And you'll just hopefully seen these slides before, which give you sort of the averages and the overview of the segment. But what I would argue is that actually when you delve into the data and start looking at potential groups or potential segments within this sort of wider direct applicant group, what you see is quite different profiles coming out, and different profiles that we can examine and look at and build different segments and different positioning and different targeting methodologies around. So I'm going to take you through what we've done. So we looked at the data and we broke it down in lots of different ways. So we looked at different features, different attributes, different behaviours of the direct students, and what potentially tied them together into segments. In the end, it's pretty clear that there's kind of three key segments that are varied enough from each other that it would present a benefit if they were separated and targeted individually. And the key factor really is age. If we look at group one, which is the typical student, you're looking at 17 to 18-year-olds. They're getting the results on results day, but they haven't made an application through UCAS, which makes them direct. Group two is what we've called the gap year student. So the 19 to 20-year-olds, so a little bit older than the first group, who got their results last year and now coming back to clearing directly the year afterwards. And then the mature student audience, so group three, which is actually quite a wide range of ages. So we're talking 21 plus all the way through to 30 plus and beyond. And there's some real common themes there, but actually some differences within that group as well, which we'll go into later. So firstly, the group one, the typical students at 17 to 18, got their going to get their results in clearing on A-level results day, and going to clearing that way. Ultimately, this audience, this segment, is incredibly similar to what we would consider a traditional student, a traditional 17 or 18-year-old who's getting their results and going into clearing that way. If you look at the demographics, the gender splits are very similar. If you look at household incomes and sort of socioeconomic sort of groups, again, very similar weightings within that area as well. If you look at the spread of course choices, you've got the same sort of spread that you would normally expect. The ones that are most popular, ones like social sciences, humanities, biological sciences. Their qualifications, 75% of this typical student group have got A-levels as well. A slightly higher number of those with BTECs, but still very, very similar to a traditional clearing student. Parental influence is still a big factor on this group, so really important to have parent targeting and parent campaigns. And then we are looking at a younger audience here, so 17 to 18, they are on Instagram, they're on Snapchat, they're on YouTube, they're on TikTok, all the platforms that I probably don't know how to use, but the 17 to 18-year-olds really know how to use them. And that's where they are most prevalent, and that's where they use most regularly. And we've just dropped a message into the group as well. If you do want to know more about TikTok and how to use that as a student marketer's guide, that is free for anyone to use. If you look at the top three motivations, you've got the standard, so subject, course content, career prospects, the sort of trifecta of the three messages that people seem to care most about across all the sectors. But if you go sort of delve into that a bit further and look at what separates the segment from the other segments, where the differences are, you see that this group are the ones that favour going to a higher tier university, so sort of rankings are important there. They're worried about accommodation, like the physical act of going to university, and they're not tied down by family or work commitments because they're only 17 or 18, so unlikely they've got to that stage in their life. I would say that we know this student. This is the traditional student that everyone has put has briefed and is looking to target for the coming clearing session. It's the target audience that makes up quite a large amount of the spend that you're going to put in there. So the similarity between the groups is undeniable. The only major difference really is that they didn't make an application in January, and that could be either missing a deadline, believing they had a better chance of securing a place by going directly into clearing. They weren't ready to go into clearing at that time, and things may have changed coming up to clearing. So in terms of a segment, in terms of an audience, I would say that this can quite happily sit within the traditional student targeting and campaigns that you're going to be running anyway. You just need to be pulled out as a separate segment. It just sits within that 17, 18-year-old audience, and the kind of tactics that we would normally talk about and recommend are getting early into market. Sort of May onwards is really key. Building a brand, driving engagement, getting leads, building remarketing audiences, leading up to July, August when results are going to come out. Having those parent campaigns that I talked about, making sure you're on the right platforms, so Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok. Focusing quite a lot of the spend though on July and August running up to A-level results day, and obviously having a really specific search and remarketing strategy around A-level results day, the day after, the week after. That's going to be your best option of getting in front of this particular audience and getting them to engage with you. But yeah, I suppose the only, again, just reinforcing being early in market and getting them to engage with you early is still the key here, because we don't know who they are particularly. They've not made an application. The only way to get them engaging with you is to get them to your website, is to get them to engage with your advertising, and then build that marketing, that remarketing audience, build them into that, and then you can use that effectively when we go into A-level results. So the gap year student, group 2, I've intentionally used images of what I consider a gap year student, just because it made me laugh more than anything else. That kind of student that goes to India to find themselves, or like Machu Picchu. But actually what we're talking about here from a gap year student point of view is any student that's just taken a break. So since they got their results the year before, they've taken a break from education, they've worked for a year, they may well have gone traveling, or they just weren't ready to enter higher education at that stage. So they're coming back after a gap. And also, like the previous group, there are quite some similarities between the traditional typical student and the gap year students. They've completed their A-levels, they are still young enough to be free of family and work commitments, and they've got quite a lot of similar motivations and sort of influences and influencers that the typical student or traditional student has. We start to see a slight change in the demographics here. I mean, there's lots of similarities, but if you compare that typical student, that 17 to 18-year-old versus the gap year student, 19 to 20, you start to see a slightly sort of lower household income average. There is definitely a slightly more pronounced number that have BTECs rather than A-levels, but still they are predominantly using Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat and TikTok. So that's the sort of platform and social media use that they use. There are some more using Facebook as we start to get a bit older, when it's starts to become a bit more cool. So yeah, thinking about possibly including other part of the Facebook family within targeting as well. But actually the real difference for this segment, and this is the reason why I've pulled out as a separate segment, is all around their timings and their behaviours. So you can see at the top, you've got that 17 to 18-year-old, quite traditional group of, starting April, May, starting to research, starting to pick it up in June, a real focus in like July, leading up to A-level results, to a week before results day, then lots of activity, sort of, in that week before results day comes out. But then when you look at 19 to 20, it shifts, and it shifts earlier. That research, you can see big spikes here in June, and then also sort of July as well. which is different from the younger audience. So that makes sense, because they've got their results. They're ready to go. They know what they've got. All they need to do is go into market, find out what's available, and then make an informed decision from that. So that makes complete sense that they would be earlier in market. And sort of being in market in May, so early again, is obviously still advisable, making sure you're in front of the audience, making sure they're engaged with you prior to June, July, when courses open, but a real focus in spend and attention on that June, July period is going to be key. I looked again more into other sort of types of behaviours around clearing. So we looked at it's not research per se, but actually when they started properly looking for a clearing place, and the difference there is really marked. So you can see that obviously the large majority, 17, 18-year-olds looking for clearing places as results come out, but then the 19 to 20-year-olds, it's pre-June, June, July, and sort of the beginning part of August is such a key time. That's when they are getting really serious about clearing and what's happening. So making sure, you're pulling them out as a separate segment and spending time and attention and money on that particular age group and audience is going to be key, because it does differ. And then when it comes to actually contacting and getting in touch with the institutions, obviously the 17 to 18-year-olds, it's all about A-level results day. But actually for the gap year student, they do start contacting June, July, so you can make take some market share there and take some students through that way. But actually quite a few of them do wait till results day, maybe because they want to see what happened on results day, if more courses came out, or just be part of the fun. So just thinking about taking the 19, 20-year-olds, pulling them out as a separate segment, shifting the spend and focus on that audience earlier is going to be key. So key takeaways from the gap year students, as they are a separate segment. I would say that messaging is important when it comes to the gap year students, because it's not that message of, oh, can't wait for your results to come out, and oh, what results have you got? It's okay, we're here for you. Doesn't really ring true with this audience. So actually the messaging should be more about subject and course content and career options, because that's what they're keen on, sort of the realities of going to university, and finding accommodation and everything that comes along with that is going to be more important. And like I said, pulling a separate segment out, targeting that spend in June, July on the right platforms. And if you do that, you're going to get a better ROI, because you're spending money and time on the segment when they're most interested and actively looking. So in theory, you'll get a better conversion rate and therefore more from the spend. And then finally, group 3, the mature student. Lucy in our marketing design team put a butterfly as the logo for this, which I really, really like. She's struggling to think about what logo sort of pulls this all together, and actually the butterfly is the perfect metaphor for this group, because the group is about change and metamorphosis. It's about upskilling, getting a better job, changing jobs, changing sectors, and ultimately changing your circumstances. I just loved that logo, and obviously a really interesting segment to look at, because it differs wildly from the 2 segments we just looked at before. So if we look at some of the demographics here, actually interestingly, from 21 to 29, we start to see more of a, even though there's more women in that group, actually there's a higher percentage of men than there has been before. But as soon as we go into 30 plus, much higher percentage of women, and that really comes from the large cohorts of females going to nursing, so female nursing students. And also, household income. Again, what you do notice within this segment is that the more, almost like the older you go through from 21 to 30 plus, all the trends we're going to talk about actually become more pronounced. With household income, for example, that there's a much higher percentage of those below average in that particular group in the 30 plus than there are in the 21 to 24s. And that's just an example of showing how, when you're thinking about this group and audience, even though it is one segment, actually there are differences at different ranges of the mature student audience. We looked at their research behaviours as well, and again, a very different story. So we still have that June, July focus time, very much like the gap year student. So they've got their qualifications, they know what they've got, they're in market when the clearing course is open. So massively important to be there and present and spending money on this older demographic. Once we get to results day, literally nothing happens for up until for the day of. It seems like everyone just stays completely clear of results day, and I don't blame them, especially after last year. But then when we do go into the day after results day, things start to pick up a little bit, but nothing major. The really interesting thing about this segment is that long tail sort of research. They're not even sort of looking at clearing until well after results day. Again, as you go from 21, 24, 25 to 29, 30 plus, the older you get, the more focus is actually 2 weeks plus, and then onwards is where they're actually looking, making decisions and getting in touch. So if you're looking at this as a separate segment of the direct applicant group, it's June, July, August, lots of spend and focus and time there, and then have a gap, and then 2 weeks plus is where there should be this sort of long tail, consistent messaging and targeting, very specific for this group. That's going to get the best return from the audience. We looked at other things like routes to higher education. So we looked here at qualifications and how that changes within the mature audience. So before we talked about 75% of the students having A levels and the rest having BTECs and not a very wide variety of other courses. Once you go into the mature audience group, you start to see a whole range of different qualifications coming out. So the 21 to 29, so the top two lines there, you've got a high percentage of BTECs, MVQs, access to HE courses, certificates of HE, as opposed to A levels. So we are looking at a slightly different audience here. So people who went into other courses and qualifications and didn't go straight into higher education. And again, if you're thinking about targeting that group as well, you can do course specific targeting. So if you want to go quite qualification targeting, so you can go quite niche. And my dog just entered the room. But if you go into the 30 plus category, there's a real swing towards NVQs, access to HE and certificates of HE. But then also you've got this other category as well. And actually when I delved into it and looked at it properly, essentially what other means here is a previous bachelor's qualification, a previous undergraduate qualification. So as you get older, the higher likelihood that they have already done a degree. And that ties into the fact that, especially that older group, it's more about career changes or career advances who are looking to, they've done something, but actually they want to go into something else. So that's the kind of messaging and the thought process and the mindset of that audience. So we can't talk about clearing at all at the moment, or sort of student recruitment, without talking about that huge rise in subjects allied to medicine and particular focus on nursing. And that matches up with the findings from UCAS and the January applications that came through. A record number of nursing applications have been influenced. A lot of that down to COVID and the impact of that, and wanting to help people and wanting to go into a sector that helps and supports and gets us through what's been a really, really difficult year and a half. And yeah, it's quite inspiring and lovely to see at the same time. So I suppose the difficulty that some institutions have that I speak to is that they aren't particularly strong on nursing, or they don't have nursing courses in clearing. So my point there would be, what else do you have in your arsenal? So what other courses allied to medicine do you have? What other courses, biological sciences or science qualifications that align or match or are similar? Because if you can promote those courses, then you're still taking advantage is the wrong word, but you're positioning the right types of courses to an audience or a group that you already know has a large appetite in that type of course and qualification. And then finally, the key takeaways from the group. Like I said before, this is a very different group from the first two segments, so you do need to take a different approach. as opposed to the first two segments. They are more likely to be living with a partner, a family, working. They care, therefore, because of that family situation, their commitments are different. They care about being close to home. They care about what funding options are available, about the cost of studying, the cost of of living, as they do a higher ed qualification. And like I said, lots of them are sort of looking to upskill or retrain. So yeah, quite a different mentality they're coming at clearing from. So we look at the platform choices. We're getting to the older group now, a bit closer to my age. So higher usage on Facebook and Messenger, especially within 30 plus group. We're looking at Instagram. Instagram's only really prevalent in that 21 to 29 group. Once you get to 30 plus, it's not really worth looking at. But that younger group, that's sort of 21 to 29, they are using YouTube and Snapchat and Instagram as well. So as you sort of move through the age brackets, you start to see Facebook becoming prominent and the other ones fading away. So just making sure you're matching the age group you're targeting with the platforms that are being used. And that the timing, so June, July, big focus then, nothing for the week after. And then 2 weeks after, a lot of focus for that long tail activity, to try and capture as many of those people who haven't yet even started looking at clearing. So from the messaging standpoint, again, when you look at the most important factors that to consider when looking at for this particular group, it's still subject, it's still course content, it's still career progression. Go with those as well. But what differentiates this audience and what will differentiate you as marketers is if you're tapping into some of these underlying issues and concerns that they have. So, positioning of those specific courses, the nursing qualifications, biological sciences, tapping into what the courses that are most of interest to those groups, talking about the access to funding opportunities that you've got, talking about flexibility, their ability to juggle family work commitments and do a qualification at the same time. If you've got the capacity and the messaging and the content to help and wrap around and help that audience, that's going to do you wonders for taking a larger market share of the mature audience. And then localization, which I've talked to a few of our clients about, and it was an assumption to begin with, but I looked into the data for one specific client and looked at very specific postcode regions that students had, that their sort of older mature student audience had come from. And what you see is a real change from sort of regional target groups to a very hyper local, pretty much around the university, within the town, within the city that the university is placed, and then also sort of easy commutable distance as well. There are some outliers, but you can tell they're on that major train routes or major roads into the city as well. So some sort of there's pockets in sort of slightly smaller towns, sort of satellite around. But there's making sure that you're pulling in your targeting and targeting on those that are local. It's going to be key. And that's it. That takes us to the end. There's the 3 new segments within the Direct Applicant group. Hopefully that was helpful for everyone. I know I love going through that because that's my thing. But if you do want to know more, please do download the report for 2021. We should be dropping the link into the chat now, so you can click on there and go through. And also, if you want to talk about your clearing strategy, if you talk about it with me, I'm happy to have a conversation, and then put you in touch with people within our organisation that can help and support and are cleverer than me. And then if you just fill out we're going to drop a get in touch inquiry form in there as well. So just drop us a note and we can get back to you. And then finally, my usual plug. So the NCS can only happen because of our partner institutions. The more we have, the better the data and insights that we get. So I would say, if you have got clearing students and you work for an institution, then please do sign up this year. Again, we're going to drop a link in there you can go to sign up for this year, and we'll let you know everything you need to do. You do get a bespoke report on your clearing students and then benchmarked against the sector. And that really does allow you to see where the gaps and opportunities lie. And And also the students are entered into a prize draw as well. So it's a win-win all round. If you do get that benchmark report, it gives you some insight, things like which segments you should be targeting, where you can win potential market share, how you should position against those segments, and start to build a more bespoke marketing strategy, like the one we just talked about with the direct audience. But that's only done with data and insight. So do sign up if you haven't done already. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break, about a minute. I'm going to go and look at questions and talk to the team of people who are organising this to see if anything's come through. I'm going to come back, answer those questions, and then we're done. Okay, so I'll be back with you in about a minute. Okay, I am back. Thank you for everyone who has asked questions. One question, the slides will be available, and we're releasing the webinar on demand shortly. And we'll send you the email, obviously, you'll get a link to it. We have got some interesting questions, so thank you from Paul, asking about which segment of the direct applicant offers the biggest opportunity. Which is a brilliant question, and one that I was thinking about, thank God, before the webinar. I think the 17 to 18 category, so the typical student, does just sit with the traditional audience. So it's a bit difficult to say that as an opportunity. That should be a much larger opportunity and a bigger part of the marketing strategy. I would say that the 19-20 gap year student audience is probably less of a priority for this year, primarily because there's such huge numbers of students that went into clearing and went into university last year. We might see a bit of a drop in that 19 to 20 segment. So still important to pull it out, but in terms of where you're going to spend time and focus, probably a bit less so on the 19 to 20s. I suppose the thing that stands out in my mind, and sort of the huge growth that I can see when I look at everything, so all the sort of UCAS channel applications, what's coming through, is that mature audience. That's where the growth in direct applicants is coming from. That's the reason it's going to be more than traditional students this year, and in particular that the older category, that 30 plus group, which is just growing and growing and growing, of people who are wanting to, but you've also got to consider that a lot of those people have lost their jobs, through COVID, or they've realised that their jobs aren't as COVID friendly, and they want to change, and the subject allied medicine just all ties together into this perfect storm of lots of people wanting to, re-educate themselves and change and change their circumstances. So I think that's the thing that I would tap into as an institution. And obviously some institutions will have a better ability to do that based on their course portfolios and how they act as an institution. But certainly, definitely, that's the one that I would really focus on and get right for 2021. And then another question, I think I've just answered that though. I did have one question, which was also, traditional media. If there's any differences between things outside of social, because I've talked a lot there about social media platforms because they're easier to measure and monitor. But what about traditional media, and how do the different segments engage with things like TV and newspapers and radio, because they are part of a marketing strategy as well. And looking into those figures is not quite as clear cut, but if you look at live TV, it's fairly even across the group. So I would say that if you are using TV as part of a marketing strategy, something quite brand-based, something quite relevant for everyone is going to work there. When looking at on-demand TV, so Netflix and Amazon's, again, it's pretty even across the group. So any sort of work in that field, keep it quite broad. Looking at newspapers and print, so both print and online, actually 50% of the 17 to 18-year-olds said they don't use them at all, which worries me a little bit for the future generations, but I suppose that is part of it. But those that do use it within that age category use it loads. So really ardent users of news and very into it, but 50% just don't use it at all. So then as you go up the groups, sort of news sites become more popular. So just think about maybe including that for the older demographics rather than the younger demographics. And then finally for radio, that's including online players as well. Again, 65% of 17 to 24-year-olds say they don't use it at all. So yes, it's not on their radar. But again, as you move into 25 plus categories, radio does become more prevalent. So certainly something to consider, but a bit for the older group. Rebecca has asked, are international audiences included in the demographics you discussed? Yes, they are. And yes, something that I want to talk about, but actually what I'm going to do is talk about the international audience and the international impact on clearing around Brexit and other international countries in a later webinar. So we'll cover that one, hopefully, not too far away, but soon. Okay, I think that's everything. That's all the questions answered. I hope that you have enjoyed it today. A little bit shorter than normal. My normal hour-long marathon, it's only 37 minutes, so there you go. But everyone take care. Thank you for listening, and hopefully see you soon.